Καλησπέρα σε όλους σας που ξαναγυρνάτε, που ήρθατε για πρώτη φορά στις ομιλίες. Σήμερα η ομιλία μας θα είναι στα αγγλικά. Έχουμε μια πολύ μεγάλη τιμή να έχουμε μαζί μας τρεις πολύ σημαντικούς καλεσμένους. Δύο από αυτούς που δεν μιλούν ελληνικά και θα σας τους γνωρίσω σε λίγο στα αγγλικά. Και η συζήτησή μας σήμερα θα είναι κυρίως γύρω από τα μουσεία σύγχρονης και μοντέρνας τέχνης και πώς αυτά μπορούν να βοηθήσουν τη γενική κατάσταση, όχι μόνο τώρα, πάνω σε αυτή την εξαιρετική στιγμή, αλλά γενικότερα. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to our distinguished speakers. I was just announcing the theme of the talk, and I'm very happy to have you all three here. This is a special, let's say, episode for me because for once I have my somehow colleagues curating, writing, but also mentors. And it's a great honor that you are with us. Also, geography matters. So it's not by chance who is and from where here. On my left or on my right for the guests, I have Zdenka Badonivac. Zdenka is talking to us today from Ljubljana. Since 1993, she's the director of the Modern Art Gallery in Ljubljana and the Museum of Modern Art. She has also initiated the first Eastern art collection, Art is 2000 Plus. Zdenka has curated many shows with Slovenian and international artists from all over. And she was also the president of CIMAM from 2011 to 2013, and many other things. For the ones, I'm sure most of you know who she is. On my right or on my left is Manuel Borja Villel, who is the director of the National Museum and Center of Contemporary Art, Reina, Sofia in Madrid. And Manuel has been the director there since 2008. After also being the director of other important institutions in Spain, the Fundación Antoni Tapies and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona. Manuel has worked with many artists in solo exhibitions, including Marcel Brudars, Lydia Clark, Hans Hake, and others, and also in various thesis exhibitions, among them, if I'm correct with the title, The Documentary and the Critic of Modernism in 2015. And also with us is our Denis Zacharopoulos, who has been recently the director of the city museums in Athens, belonging to the municipality, the gallery, the municipal art gallery, and other spaces. Also, he was the artistic director of the Macedonian Museum of Contemporary Art. He was one of the curators or co-directors of the Documenta 9 with artistic director Jan Hood. Denis was also the director of Espace Kernekek, and also he was working as a general inspector with the Ministry of French Culture, among many other things. Has worked closely with artists like Bustamante or Juan Munoz or Masud, among others. And thank you all for being here tonight. And with no further ado, I would like to ask with Zdenka. You know, here in Greece, we are fortunate and unfortunate to have a very strong and vivid art scene for the moment, quite international in some ways, to have very strong women curators that initiated institutions, museums, but somehow to have also a kind of a curse. And let's say our National Museum of Contemporary Art not being able to function as should have been. So we have this oxymoron of a museum built over 10 years now without really functioning in full blossom as it should. I mean, with some, of course, breaks during Documenta, or right now also it opened without a director. But I want to go back before going to what is happening with us with this pandemic, which is actually liminal. It's a chasm, it's a crack and also a curve. To go back when you started with the museum and the modern art gallery, and how you sustained so much and so vivid this institution since 1993, in very brief and sort of kind of fruitful advices that you can share with us.
Thank you, Marina, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion. You know, it's much easier to answer your first question, how I started, than how I sustained. You know, this is almost, I don't know, I even myself, I don't understand it. But okay, I started, you know, in very interesting times in the beginning of the 90s when, you know, just after the socialism collapse and Yugoslavia and the war began in the territory of former Yugoslavia. It was times of transition in many different ways, and it was also a time of increased globalization, computerization. So all this very, very important social, political, cultural frames formed me, of course, as a young director. I think the first mandate I sustained because exactly because it was transition from something that was very firm, you know, in times of Yugoslavia. The cultural policy, you know, the state, the system, everything was like forever. Nobody believed actually that it will collapse one day. But time of transition brought another atmosphere and another sensibility, you know, that nothing is forever, of course, and the things were not settled yet. So there was no firm cultural policy. And I always like to say that in that situation, I learned more from the artists than from the, you know, from other institutions or the cultural policy. So the 80s in Ljubljana, that decade was very important. Also my formative decade when, you know, many different self-organized initiatives were around, which were very, you know, thoughtful for us young curators. So we learned from them how to behave in the situation when there were many opportunities, new opportunities to work more internationally. So one thing was to become more international, you know, in semi-isolated country. It was, of course, always it's important to emphasize that Yugoslavia was completely different, that other parts of the socialist world and the borders were open and so on. But still, you know, there was a feeling of not being integrated enough in the broader cultural exchange on international level. So there was especially among my colleagues of my generation, really a deep wish to start working internationally, to have this broader space for exchange. So I think this was one very important thing, and another was created by the war. Of course, the war was another, if not the first, situation that influenced my ideas of the museum of professional work strongly. So what is the role of the institution in time when the war is in the vicinity, and all of these things? We also in 96 organized a symposium Living with Genocide when I met, I think for the first time, Denis, who came. It was very nice and very important debate on the, you know, the relation between art, war, genocide, and all these things. A very, very important period in my life. And then, you know, the things later in the 90s became very, you know, deeply integrated in the questions of contextualization, Eastern Europe, and so on. But we, from the beginning, we wanted to go beyond the demands of the market, for example, beyond a commodification of the region. You know, that has been always my strong orientation, let's say, you know, to whatever I did with Eastern Europe, a collection and writings, exhibitions, it was always, you know, done with this ethics that went beyond the commodification of and instrumentalization of the region. So maybe this is enough for the beginning.
I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting. There are few very interesting points, of course. The different crises in plural, the war, the chasm with the former Yugoslavia, and the open market that can come back in the discussion, the commodification and the identity politics. Yet, I have to say, you, as reading from your texts and somehow studying your work, me and my colleagues, you maintain this kind of position between the, I mean, not commodifying the Eastern identity, but somehow not also giving to this kind of homogeneous globality as well. Somehow this kind of more of a local globality that it's somehow spread in different localities, or a global condition in different localities, not this kind of homogeneous contemporary art, if I'm sort of understanding well.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think I would like to use Manolo's term, situated. I think in the Reina, the colleagues are using this term, which very helps now, you know, to answer your question. So it is, of course, very important that you know where you speak from, you know, that your locality is your point of utterance, but at the same time, it is also very important that you, of course, situate yourself in certain political, social, a broader context, but you communicate with a similar urgencies around the world. So you are not isolated. You are not in your locality, and you know, locality became also, especially now in times of pandemic, very it can be very problematic because it has double face. It is something that, you know, we are obliged to take care, you know, communities and all these things, but at the same time, we are pushed to the situation which calls provincialism, parochialism, nationalism. So all these different aspects are common for the locality.
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's also great that you make this bridge with the situated, because this is where I was going, as I want to pass to Manolo and to speak about this kind of different situated knowledges and realities, without, of course, making this kind of division in this parochial plurality of sovereignties. But how can we speak about sovereignties in relation? And I want to go to the, of course, to many questions that are related to the Museum of Reina Sofia, starting mostly of all from the contextualization of the collection, of such a rich collection within Madrid and within the Spanish condition today, within the post-colonial, crypto-colonial, meta-colonial, whatever you want to call it, as you have also a new immigration from Latin America to, let's say, Venezuela or other places in Madrid. But I'll let you make the talking and answer for this from your situated place and perspective.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Pleasure being here. Okay, let me, because the thing is, things change so quickly that, you know, like every other day you can, or you have to kind of explain things with different nuances. So the thing is, I mean, ours is a national museum. It has a collection, is a major institution, and it has all the advantages and disadvantages of that. And it has changed in the context. I mean, one of the issues, of course, is collection, and it implies it's a national collection. And, you know, national, it's something that has to do with limits. It has to do with identity, with often having to do a fixed identity, which normally is in the myth. I mean, you have it is this kind of, in our case, when we arrived there, you had this kind of lineage, which went from Goya to Picasso to Miro to Tapies and to the present. In a way, it was, and as you notice, all male, all individual, no collectives, very characteristic. So that's one reality. Second reality, it means that it has an impact, it has a relationship with, with a place. That means with economy. And economy, I mean, there are many types of economy. So the way it was understood, it was something linked, of course, to tourism, linked to big spectacle with big lines of people. And the third element of this big museum is that it's a public museum, and public is great. I mean, to be public means to be public service, but also it means often to be administration. It means to be transparent, but at the same time opaque. It means to be sometimes the subject, or to be under this kind of structural violence when you have this kind of administrative laws that make things very, very difficult. So in that situation, we try to change the concept of the collection and to start thinking in a long-term history where, I mean, you have the Republic in Spain, that means Picasso, etc., but you might link that with when modern history starts in the 15th century, when you link it with things that are happening other places, and when you start, let's say, a process of decolonizing your own history. So that's one. Second, a plurality, a complexity of exhibition programs that address themselves to many publics, so that implies a different type of understanding what public is, and implies also a different type of economy. I'm just trying to be very, I mean, all of that would need explanation, but just to put the lines. The third place, which I, as a reaction to that, the idea of the archive, but also, which also implies the idea of an international network, the idea of an international network of network of institutions which are very different. So that means institutions of the commons, that means squatters, that means other museums, that means a complex institutional structure that somehow implies a resilience or a resistance against this kind of bureaucratic structural violence. And then finally, this element of being situated, speaking from one place, which it means that everything you do, of course, has an effect. Everything you do has a meaning. Everything you do is always in relation to a very specific context, which is very different of being local or being an institution of proximity. Is something else that would imply other type of, will imply also longer reflection, that I leave it for maybe for later discussion. So in that context, and also that's, how we reacted to the situation today. So I wanted to point three things, which I think they are important in that context. One is sustainability. I think you have to be, of course, sustainable in the situation of today. Second, solidarity. I think that's very important. Solidarity, which means an institution of caring. It means if we before were in a welfare society, maybe we have to be in a care society. That's kind of important to us, because as we were mentioning when we were before being open, the Reina Sofia was very much criticized when it opened because the building was originally a hospital. Actually, the many visitors at the beginning, they used to say that smell to sick people, that smell to chloroform, that and actually maybe that's important, maybe that's interesting today that we were a hospital temporarily, we were a museum, and maybe we should become a hospital again, a different type of hospital, of course, where we should learn how to live different, and of course where we have many illness. And I think this element of being sick, of a society that is sick, a society that is sick in many levels, I mean, of a virus, but also ecologically, socially, in terms of democracy, I think that should be there, and I think that's important to us. And of course, you cannot be individual, you cannot, I mean, the idea of the individual, then the businessman, the museum as a model, or the curator as a model of this kind of businessman, this kind of nomadic cultural entrepreneur is failed. So probably we will have to travel less and be more connected. So that's also what it means to be situated, this element of being connected, and I think that's very important. Of course, being situated and being connected is Dora Haraway, so that's actually the references for those ideas.
Thank you very much. Very dense, but I keep some points in our minds, like the structural violence of the bureaucracy that is interesting to discuss. Of course, the decolonization of one's own history, and somehow the sustainability and solidarity, but not as a business model. It's kind of interesting, all of those. Once the structural violence, because it's something also that I think we suffer a bit in the Mediterranean, or let's say Sub-Mediterranean, or countries quite a bit, or everywhere, I guess. And to the point that this also sometimes affects the content. For example, I remember that there was a discussion in the Museum of Contemporary Art here not to change the collection for 10 years out of a kind of a structural violence with not necessarily a reason. Also the solidarity within the different situations or situated places by Hathaway. I will dare the locality, because I think the locality has also been colonized by this kind of populist politics. But the localities in connections is an important, I think, for me, but this is also, I'm challenging you both, is also an important, an international locality is also an important point, and might be important also for the years to come, as long as we are in a certain kind of network. So how to be in a kind of an international network without traveling. That's also interesting to come back to Greece, as somehow after, before as well, in many sites, but after the Documenta 14, that was an amalgam of everybody's individual effort in Athens, who followed the score as per a musical score, or the notations, was mostly the independent spaces, independent artists, from which as Zdenka was saying, we learn, or Manuel was saying, how we take care of also these quotes and these kind of more flexible organizations. Here we had an entropy, which is still, we don't have a state structure, but somehow right now we have a very vivid independent spaces structure that could have give the information even to a museum. What is kind of interesting and different in Greece is that often we hear we are the new Berlin. This is mostly coming from international galleries, and this is where we go back to Dora Haraway and the situations, because we can never be Berlin or anything like Germany, because there is a special situation here that requires risk as a citizens and other kind of things that if somebody is willing to go along with it, it goes along with it. Our visitors come usually with money. Instead of using the money of the state, they bring the money of northern countries. But Denis, let's hear the Greek situation, or the international Greek situation, or the international seen by this perspective.
First of all, I want to thank everybody and to say how far I am extremely happy to be with Zdenka and with Manolo. Also because I've always believed that, let's say, a democratic world is built on institutions in plural. Let's say the medieval, feudal world was the institution. The state, the king, or the church was the institution. There was only one institution. The democratic world is built on a lot of institutions, one contradicting the other, which creates certainly the problems Manolo has said on one side, that is the bureaucracy and all the obstacles you have to go through when you are running an institution. But on the other side, the possibility to create institutions. And I'm happy that both museums, I was there when they started. You know, I met Zdenka with Igor and with all her team at the moment they were really creating the museum in Ljubljana. And I was at the moment the Reina Sofia started also. And I made my studies in France, and I worked with people. They really created museums like Jean Cassou, the Museum of Modern Art in Paris, and other people. I believe the possibility to build something is quite important. And it is usually after a, let's say, a kind of tragedy or a kind of real crisis, like a war, etc., or like a end of dictatorship, that real institutions, at least cultural institutions, come out as real perspectives to be able to go over the trauma of what was and create, let's say, also as Manolo said, how to transform a hospital in a museum and how to keep somehow the role of a museum as a healing role for people in the world, not people in the locality. On the other side, if I remember well, the Ljubljana Museum is the other way around. You have, let's say, buildings which are created as celebrating a local culture. And at the end of a regime, you have to transform this monumental architecture of a building which is built for a museum into a place that will be hosting really people and not ideologies, will be host contradictions and not one-sided options. It's unfortunately something that never happened to Greece after the war. Let's say 50 and more French artists or people living in France, starting with Picasso, have donated works in order to create a building in honor to the Greek resistance against the Nazis after the war. Because of the civil war, it was considered, Picasso and all the group, as communist, so it was refused. We still have these works, except of the Picasso that has been stolen, unfortunately. And it was a Picasso of 37, a Dora Maar painting, which was part of the Guernica studies, and small one, but very important as meaning. We skipped this period after the war to have a museum because we went back to celebrate our antiquities. After the end of dictatorship, with the possibility of Yolas, of Christian Zervos, of a lot of people, they wanted to donate their collections. The state has refused, also saying we have other things to do, or please give us only the Greek artists, we don't need the international artists. So we come to the late 90s with the possibility for one curator of the National Pinakothek, which is only Greek. I mean, they have international art in the storage because they never considered it is important to show it, or they show it partly. I mean, we have nearly one of the biggest collections of all Goya prints, for instance, first edition, both acquired by one of the really important founders of the Pinakothek, saying that if we want to have Greco, we need to have Goya. And when we had the From Greco to Picasso show, we never thought to include our Goyas and our Picasso. It stayed in the storage because we wanted really to show imported meaning, but not to assume this meaning for us. I'm happy to see that with the years, a lot of people started, because let's say after the end of, even before the dictatorship from the 60s, the individual contribution was much more important than the state one. Even if the state tried to do things, but it was always kind of half the way. Let's say appointments, one or the other have missed. But individually, there were a lot of people that have done things, including curators, including art critics, especially artists. And I'm very happy to hear about solidarity, as Manolo said, but also about groups which are not localities, which are not only international circuit like VIP or jet set circuits, etc., which exist, and we have it more and more in Greece, the so-called people coming for the new Berlin. But I mostly see Athens as an old Berlin because I see the wall right there. It's one of the places the wall hasn't fallen. And now with the Turkey stories, the wall is more and more there. So we are also a part of a world that continues to experience constantly the existence of a cultural, historical, political, economical war in the middle of a globalization that makes that money knows no walls, no nothing. And also pandemic knows no walls, etc. It goes everywhere. It doesn't make any difference if you are a rightist or leftist, Asian or European. And of course, with the problem of immigration, which is an extreme problem related also with the lack of control and of understanding of new technologies, which are the real army, which could be a real culture. But on the other side, it works more and more like an army instead of a culture. So the real situation in Greece these days, for me, is an extraordinary number of younger artists, and of some older artists, but mostly younger artists. They reorganize their life. They create alternative situations. There are more and more artists in residence programs. And it's funny because we consider ourselves to be the country of hospitality, and we don't have any place to have artists in residence. So we don't give hospitality to artists. We expect artists to come for the opening and then go. We expect our objects to come, but we don't really take time to work with people. And that is what happens in the city, even if sometimes it can be very, very superficial. But on the other side, it is important because through the discussions, through this way of invading the structures, from one side you have a negative contamination with the pandemic. On the other side, you have a positive contamination with culture. And I mean, this kind of contamination, which means to enter circuits and to create space, or to find empty space and to occupy empty space in order to do things, what Documenta tried to do, but unfortunately it was not at the exact moment, and I believe a lot of people didn't understood. But it's always like that. Zdenka had a lot of troubles to convince people in Ljubljana, and Reina Sofia had a lot of troubles. I was there. Before working to Documenta, we were working with Carmen Jimenez, with Paco Calvo Serraler, etc., in order to create a European circuit of Santiago de Compostela, not against, but as an alternative to Documentas and biennials, etc., to have one artist in one city, small city sometimes, to do a permanent work and to go there and work. And suddenly we had Mr. Famous, great Mr. Semprún, who came and said, no, we don't need international art. We don't need Europe, it's Spain. We need Spanish artists. Let's go back to Spanish realism, etc. We had the same thing with Melina Mercouri in Greece, you know. So great people, great writer, great comedians, etc. But of an ideology that is too old-fashioned to me. I mean, it relates more to Hollywood or to nationalistic issues. And I don't know, I believe even Imperio Argentina would do better than Mr. Semprún as, as Minister for Culture. Instead, I mean, at least she knew how to use perfectly castanets, you know. So in that sense, I believe that the detail is what makes the generality. At the moment, generality is trying to exclude all the details. So I believe that's the only thing I can really understand. And I'm so happy because both Zdenka and Manolo, from what I know, they work with details. They work with putting together a lot of different details with different artists, creating new perspectives, but not in the sense of mono perspective like the Renaissance. You don't close one eye, you keep your two eyes open and you look like a bit like Strabic, but no matter. You move a little bit and you see better with the other eye. We are in a moving world, and let's see that we get a little busy, especially all the people that, like me, we get a little busy to go from one millennium to another because we don't go, I don't feel I go from one century to another. I believe we've changed really a millennium. I believe the world from, let's say, the medieval, the Renaissance to the 2000 is an old world, and now it's a new world that has, and it's not such a brave new world. It's simply a world full of uncertainties, full of unknown things we have to explore. And perhaps exploration is not so bad.
Maybe exploration is quite a key word, especially in museums and situations here that they want permanent collections to be out there forever, untouched and unmoved. And I think it's also very important that you bring with us also this kind of what unites us and divides us, the pandemic that everybody has, but also you bring the idea of the immigrant. And of course, we all know how much we are in this kind of parallel realities, like while we are closing or closed up within our borders and our lockdowns, there is this population that illegally...
Marina, in Germany, the Greeks were together with the Yugoslavians immigrants. In France, I lived, Spanish people were immigrants.
Yeah, but I don't understand in which way. What I was trying to say is, of course, we are immigrants in Greece. Most of us come from the Ottoman, you know, we are Ottomans. And so we are not really, but what I'm trying to say is, as we speak right now, there are people that they're constantly passing the borders in the risk of their life anyway, because they're gonna be drowned. but also while we are trying to protect ourselves from this corona. I mean, it's been only not even 2 months where a camp in Greece, a very big camp that most of you know, the Moria camp, somehow the culture didn't do anything, burned themselves, like the immigrants burned the camp because somehow somebody decided to do lockdown there, and the virus came, of course, not from the immigrants because they're super careful, but from workers, from health workers. It doesn't matter, but I'm just saying the paroxysm of setting on fire your own, your only own home, which are different. And this is kind of interesting also about, as all of you three are mentioning, the healing somehow nature or responsibility in some ways of the museum, but without heroic claims. What also, which is also very, very important. If this would have been, this heroic claim would be the structural value, violence, and the opposite, the detail that Denis referred to, this kind of detail that doesn't result to sensational exhibitions, sensational marketing around museums, and kind of valid sustainability plans. Because here in Greece or other places, some people, and this is what I call locality, that nobody likes in this table the word, but let's call it idiosyncrasy, that we keep hearing different marketing, let's say, efforts doing sustainability plans for museums, but they're doing a sustainability plan for a museum in Greece or in Spain, in Madrid, or in Ljubljana, as if it was a museum in London or Belgium, and these are different facts. I think the perspective from where you look the rest of the world, you broadcast to the rest of the world, is kind of important. And so I want to make one more round around us, since we have now the different other different proposals on the table, plus the wall or the chance of the pandemic to restore and to rebirth or not. And Zdenka, or who has something urgent that wanted to add in this situation of what we are discussing without directing a specific question?
If you love, Zdenka, yeah, because I wanted to answer, but you prefer Zdenka?
No, whoever wants, just take your time. We have time for all the answers, and I'm glad that we all want to answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's because that I think is very relevant. You mentioned sustainability, and of course, which sustainability, and also we have also with the European money and etc. We have plans to build, of course, not museums. I mean, we are very small in relation to the huge, not crisis, catastrophe. But the thing is, we want to rebuild where we were, or we want to do something else. So I think this is very important. And to do that, I think that implies to decolonize, I mean, or to use another word, I mean, you have to rethink the institution. And of course, managers, they will, managers, quote, quote, they will never rethink the institutions. They are about efficiency. They are about trying to get, so I think this is quite important. So that's one thing that I think we should really be very clear. Second, the pandemic, I mean, their well is very tiny in relation. I mean, you just have to go and see the street people doing lines to get food. I mean, the crisis is really major. So, I mean, you just have to see the politics. I mean, when you see the States, Brazil, it looks like we are in a kind of global civil war, which is another type of war. I mean, it's not nation against nation, it's vertical, nation against people. I mean, it's so power. So I think that's the second point. I think it should be very important that we cannot be alone. I mean, we all been in institutions, in foundations, and sometimes when, for example, you want to support collectives that are, quote, quote, not artistic, or you want to do an activity which somehow breaks the lines of what a museum is supposed to say, first you are doing a crime. I mean, so they can actually punish you, talking about this structural violence. A second, also we have some kind of self-censorship. It's like, you know, we are doing something. So what I mean is we have to, whatever changes should happen, it should happen with other collectives, with people, with society. It cannot be there well together. So this is my second point, which I think is very important. My third point is that I mean, we are normally thinking of museum in terms of representation, in terms of, but maybe should not. I mean, because you mentioned Greece doesn't have collections. I mean, in Spain we had great buildings, but not all of them have collections. So maybe it's too late to have collections. Maybe, I mean, I'm not saying we should not have collections, but maybe there are other types of being together, of doing our practice, which is about hospitality, is about talking, is about discussing, is about doing actions. And I would even say more. I would say that why we should not have collections, why we should pay for collections, why anybody has to pay. So maybe we should start claiming that collections or art belongs to everybody and really belongs to everybody, and that museums are just custodians or collectors are just custodians, and maybe we should have a right to those collections. And then my fourth and last point is that I think we should work in two speeds. One, because I agree with Denis, I think we are in a millennial, I mean, probably we are like in the 14th century. Maybe we will not see what the 15th century will be, but we are in a change, and I think we should work in that line. So that means we should work in a long-term idea with those general ideas, but at the same time, and I mean, I could see it here around, I mean, I will not be here, and hopefully Guernica will be there, the museum will be open, but probably the ecosystem around Reina Sofia I would not say in a few years, I would say in a few months, unless we do something, maybe it doesn't exist because the situation is almost like a war. So I think it's very important to work long term, but also to demand measures so people survive. I mean, just like that. And we are part of that, I mean, the ecosystem. And whenever we program, or whenever we work, or whenever we do budgets, if, of course, the bylaws allow us, or otherwise we should try to work to change the bylaws, I think we should think in an ecosystem, and we should think in other people. So I think those four elements are very important.
Zdenka, you wanted to add also to this, and then I will.
Yeah. So so it's about question what the museum should do in the situation in the year 2020, where I agree we start understand time differently. So it's certain turn in understanding of time. For me, it was until last year, I was more future orientated, let's say, kind of, all this planning something almost utopian, dreaming of a museum, whatever, we can do better and how we can progress and so on. But from this year on, for me, the question, as Bifa put it, what can be done when nothing can be done became very important. So, he says, Franco Berardi, that it's probably possible that nothing can be done, that power has become so deeply entrenched in the automatism of the daily life, let's say. So it is probably something that we need to answer in the museums too. So how to articulate it. So I think that maybe two crucial things are here to be mentioned. One is, of course, that the museums still need to serve as and more as a place of critical thinking in or all other art institutions and organizations. I see also here in Ljubljana we have the situation where there is more and more hostility from the side of the government against contemporary art and contemporary cultural workers and you know, different organizations of civil society. So there are, you know, on a daily basis already the examples of the hostilities. So the art and culture are still like the pillars of critical thinking here in Ljubljana, and I think elsewhere in Europe as well, which is very important. So it is not only about the critical thinking that museums still keep working on, but also which is probably more like new moment, it's that museum need to work more on different affects. So what Manolo was saying, and you know, the questions of solidarity and care that are so frequently being mentioned today are from this frame of the affects as well. So what do we need today when we lost our future? So what is left? You know, what is left after we lost our hope? So I think, you know, duration, work on daily basis, care for each other, all these things, very simple everyday things are important. Besides that, I think it is also important to work on the shared imagination. You know, what is society? Society is when we share something together. And this society today is very fragmented. It is, you know, it lost this common thing. And this is a problem. So I think that museum should work more on this common, also in terms of not only the common knowledge and general intelligence and all these things which are important, but also, you know, the imagination, that we have to create something together again, you know, the shared imagination. I think this is something very important, the projection. So we need to learn how to project. You know, we need to invent our future again.
This is quite important and hopeful, to invent our future. As I was hearing Manolo and you talking, few things that come in our mind. One is the question, starting with Manolo, where are we going? Are we going to somewhere that we knew? And that brings in mind a French philosopher, but I'm trying not to stick with only French you know, references, but never mind, Michel Serres, that somehow makes the metaphor of crisis as a swimmer that goes from one point to another, and at a certain point you don't see land from where you left, you don't see the land where you're going, but somehow beneath, in the dark waters, there might be a set of possibilities that we don't know, we didn't know before. So that's a kind of maybe a kind of an investment in this kind of present that will have a future, even if it wants or not. So this is for me kind of important to discuss further and somehow invest, or to point out also, as I hear you speak of solidarity and this common that we lost, also coming to a French philosopher, living in common and not common living, as Jean-Luc Nancy will say, living in common. And it's true that we lost this common by not having really lost it. When I hear the different museums speaking among us, is like, I hear we are still in Europe and there is still a certain kind of, let's call it public or state funding or help, when in a continent like the United States, who supposedly is falling apart, but this Google, Facebook, whatever social media, this company makes it in an empire, economical empire at the same time. There is absolutely no state backing for shared imagination. So for me, and I would ask you also after we hear Denis about this network of international, but in general, retrieving this kind of, or rethinking or re-understanding that still we are in this situation that we can think in common is a kind of a privilege that the rest of the world is losing, and soon we might be losing it too, as this virus helps this fragmentation as well. So I think all the points are very interesting. I don't know, Denis, if you wanted to add something to what we are discussing here.
I want to react, not necessarily to act. React in positively, because I believe we are very complementary the way we are talking about. And I guess we have also, although we see each other, I haven't seen Zdenka for long, etc. But nevertheless, I believe the world has become too big in order to be part of this international jet set going from art fair to art fair. I must say I haven't been to an art fair since at least the mid-90s or the late 90s. And with the exception once in Madrid, because it was the honor of Greece was an honor, and we had to make a show. And so I was curating a show with Katerina Grevos and Sanya Papa at Alcalá. But so I've had to see again an art fair. But I believe that that's one thing. It's like Mario Merz was saying, have you ever seen an animal going to the Salon of Agriculture? Because they bring the animals there to kill them. You know? So I don't believe artists go to the art fairs. But artists should go to the museums. They do go to the museum for many reasons. One of the reasons is that museum is a place where you can get the maximum you can get as an information. That means the relation with the work of other artists and with the relation with, let's say, the better work of most artists. Museum is a place where you can reconsider history. That means, as Manolo said before, and as I experienced myself in museums, the categorization of contemporary art, modern art, 19th century art, academic art, Renaissance art, Rococo art, etc., all that's has become a little obsolete. So I've worked very soon. I started to exhibit a Piranesi excavation drawings next to photographs of Thomas Struth of Germany, and how you explore a site next to Lothar Baumgarten, next to etc., etc. And on the other side, Piranesi imaginary constructions with Pertiekeby or with other artists. They really had to invent other ways to consider what architecture could be, not as a creative architecture, not as fancy architects are selling expensive objects today. You don't need a collection because the museum is the building, but because you need also to reconsider space. And in that sense, architecture is part of the arts also. It's not only the recipient of the art, not the building. It's a way to think, etc., etc. So let's say that in relation to that, I would like to react to what Zdenka said. Sure, we grew up with our idea of future and our utopian dreams. I guess when Zdenka said we lost our future, she's right in a way, but I will put it the other way around. I would say, quoting a sentence which is quite dear to me, Maeterlinck, the Belgian writer, wrote once, "Imagination is the memory of the future." And I believe that if we lose our imagination, which means we lose our memory of the future, we don't remember, we don't create what we would like to remember. And in that sense, I believe we don't need so much utopians, because utopian belongs to the business world these days. They want to create new cities in Africa, in Asia, etc., etc. They want to create new values, new money, etc. I believe we need somehow to take care of experience, of experience sets, to take care of experiences as something we have to transform. We have to imagine how to transmit experience to the future, because that is our future. The experience of life we'll have to transmit in the next generations, in the next centuries. And what makes an artwork to resist time? When you enter a museum, of course, as an art historian, I had to learn so many useless, perhaps, details for the viewer. Who is who and what words what and why is doing like that and not like that, etc. But I know that when you enter a museum, even as a totally stupid person, you go out with one or two works, they've marked your life, with not understanding anything and not knowing nothing about Tiziano or Greco or whoever. You get an experience of work which is a condensation of something. And this, we need to find back these two ends of our job, at least, if we can call it a job. The one is the most strong condensation of experience, which is an artwork, be it a major painting or a nonsense thing. I don't care. It's not. I mean, the void or the nonsense are part of our job, part of art.
Yeah.
And on the other side, to find again a big space, a big extension. Young people today, they look Daredevil and Marvel stuff and comic stuff, and I am totally alien to that. But yeah. I started, because I have young friends, to have a look. And why are they so different from, let's say, when I was reading Jules Verne? You spoke of Michel Serres, and Michel Serres, of course, considers that all the pathology of the 19th century hypocrisy is hidden, is transformed into Jules Verne, whom is the other end of Balzac. Balzac tried to make a realist presentation of the bourgeois world, and Verne creates a kind of utopic or fantastic world, which is perfectly real.
I mean, I think that the new references and all these experiences that you're saying is quite important. Also, I think that as we are running out of time, I will run through and I think also that the truth is we are in a two-dimensional experience for the moment. So what I heard you saying a bit was it's time to think together, as we cannot really be together in front of any kind of artwork necessarily right now. I think also there is a necessity of who is the citizen or the artist or the ecosystem that surround us. And it's true that art fairs or everything that was in such a plurality, the art market was a problem, but then people have to sustain themselves. And there is, apart from the museum, a whole other ecosystem around the museum, the future, let's say, that somehow has to survive this period. And we have pretty serious signs that many people from not only by health, but also economical problems, but many people in our profession, as artists or as audiences, will not survive this problem. So these are things that we have to think, I guess, together, and maybe bring this kind of new references. Of course, we saw a kind of overabundance of open archives in the internet. The second, which is wonderful on some part. The second question is who has access as such to internet. It's good to have access to our archive and what's happening with our head experiencing everything we had to experience only in this two-dimensionality. And also how the artists, are they getting percentage? How the artists are gonna sustain themselves while this is happening, because it's very easy. I think we will see very soon the market of the already, let's say, established artists going up, because buying clothes, buying objects, buying through the internet sometimes is easier. So on that note, on this thinking together, some additions, brief and closing remarks. I think Zdenka or Manolo wants to say something. I don't know, you're both laughing. Zdenka.
I think it's referring to what Denis says, how important it is to experience the artwork. Again, I think it is, I agree, but at the same time, you know, it is not only about how the individuals experience an artwork, but what we learn from the artwork in terms of sensibility, also in terms of sensibility, you know, what you were saying, Marina, how this two-dimensional computer world and the archives and many things that we can't consume today at home. So the sensibility is, of course, you know, the experience, the sensors are becoming more and more important. Here is also the role of the museum very important. So the museums have to learn how to create the place of sensibility again in different way. And this also relates to the sensibility for different people, you know, precarious workers, artists, you know, people who are without jobs today because of the situation and so on, you know. So this is, you know, very important today.
Thank you, Zdenka. And Manolo?
Yeah, yes, to complement what Denis and Zdenka were saying is I would like to remind those a sentence or an idea or concept that Marcel Brothers pointed always, is that we are in a space of conquest or a space for conquest. What it means is like we always, I mean, if we were talking about soccer, we always play in the field of the enemy. We always play in the field of the other. It's not our field. Our field has been taken already. And I think that's very important because we have to understand that the language, the tools, the spaces are not ours. So I think we have to take them back and to make them our own spaces, our own tools, our own language.
Thank you very much. Denis?
Good to say one last word about what you said about the economy of the artist and of the art world, because we are more and more into this internet reality. And the real fact is that not all this Amazon, et cetera, and even the people, they sell clothes and shoes on internet, they don't pay taxes. They don't belong to a country. They are somewhere. So I would say it is about time, the same thing they did for photography and for the movies, etc., for the visual arts, to make so that if they appear somewhere on Google, on internet, etc., that visual artists can get something, a fee or something, or an interest, because this is the only way to sustain a future economy of an art world that will be very much virtual. But that doesn't fear me, because I've learned, you know, when I was younger, photographs were black and white. They were so little. And how did I love the world of Agnes Martin on a black and white photograph on a paper, you know. Imagination, art criticism, somebody said something, a word of an artist, something. So I don't believe so much, I mean, the relation to the word, it is definitely the physical relation to the object, but it is especially the sentimental, the experience of a world, not an object. And this world is also a narrative, is also a way to think about, is also something about the artist or something about somewhere in the world, somewhere else. So this is also something the internet has to pay a little bit back to culture in order to start to be a tool, a weapon for this international civil war, and to become a tool for culture that will sustain museum creation, art, and the relation to the public with a more interesting way than just making money out of it. Thank you.
That will be amazing. For the moment, maybe all this Cambridge Analytics, the one, the other work in the benefit of Trump or other, but we hope that soon, as we play to the football, to the match of to the field of the other, we're gonna manage to do this. I want to thank you all for being here. I know how precious your time is. At the same time, I think it's quite important that we are continuing with these conversations as much as we can until we will play to our own field. To this, I will bring a Nigerian for a change quote of Chinua Achebe in the book Things Fall Apart, which is a classic outside the European world, almost like Julian Verne's. And at a certain point, and it's happening in the 50s in Nigeria, where the missionaries are going. And at a certain point, I mean, it's written in the 50s for an earlier time. At a certain point, the chief of the village says, it's not about food or being able to watch the moon, because every man and woman can have something little to eat or watch the moon from their own hut. But it's extremely important for our kinship to get all together and see the moon together. So maybe this is what, as we learn also from this kind of non-Western, sometimes uncolonized truths, it's kind of interesting to keep on doing this. And I want to thank you very much for everything you've done to the art so far, all three of you. So we are here, and also for helping us right now sustain, on behalf also of Art Athena, of sustain this kind of communication between us. Have a very good night.
And let's hope we'll meet in Madrid and Ljubljana soon.
And in Athens, you're all very welcome. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.